Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the 12th lecture on report writing skills. Dear students, if you remember that in the last lecture we discussed that in the last two lectures rather we discussed what are informational reports, what are analytical reports, and what is the difference between the two. Then we discussed some of the types of informational reports. After that we discussed the various organizational plans of the informational reports. Out of the different types of informational reports, we picked up two: the periodic reports and personal activity reports. These are two of the many types of informational reports. Then we discussed each one of them in detail along with an example of each, whether that example was following the recommended pattern or not. After that, dear students, we moved on to analytical reports. And in analytical reports we discussed the various organizational plans that are recommended to organize an analytical report. In the last lecture specifically we discussed that how to organize an analytical report on the basis of conclusions and recommendations. There we also discussed, if I can move the slide back for you here, and we call it the direct approach. As you can see on the slide, that when you divide an analytical report on the basis of conclusions or recommendations, we call it the direct approach, where you first in the very beginning float the conclusion and the recommendation. And the situations in which you use the direct approach, we also discussed those different situations where direct plan for writing an analytical report is suggested. Afterwards, we discussed the difference between dividing an analytical report on the basis of conclusion and recommendation. These are two different stories. So when you organize the analytical report on the basis of a conclusion, it's slightly different from that in which you are dividing it on the basis of recommendation. Conclusion is simply telling you the causes of any problem, and recommendation moves a step ahead in which the solution is also suggested. Here, as you can see on the slides, just giving you a revision of the previous slides of the previous lectures. Okay, then dear students, we also discussed one example of each type while we were trying to divide the analytical report on the basis of conclusion and recommendation. Today, dear students, we would discuss another type of strategy, which is the indirect strategy, where you will not be dividing the analytical reports on the basis of conclusions or on the basis of recommendations. Rather, you will be dividing them on the basis of your logical arguments. This is the indirect approach, where you are not beginning in your analytical report directly with the conclusion or recommendation. Why? What are the various situations in which you will be going for this indirect approach of organizing your analytical report? When you're, as you can see on the slide, when your audience is not receptive, means that when there is some sort of reservation existing between you and your audience, or your audience is having some reservations against your recommendations, or may have some, and you have some inkling in your mind that yes, my reader my audience will be having some reservations against my recommendations and conclusions. In that situation where there is no trust relationship between you and your reader, direct approach is not recommended. You should not be floating the conclusions and recommendations in the beginning, because it can further intensify those reservations, further increase the distance, further deteriorate the situation. So in case and you say that if your audience and if your reader is not receptive, there you should not be dividing the analytical report on the basis of recommendations and conclusions. Rather, you should be organizing it on the basis of your logical arguments. First come up with the arguments and then let those arguments move to the conclusion and recommendation. 1, as you can see on the slide. Then if you feel that better results are expected if you first give the details, if you first encourage the reader to know the entire detail behind any conclusion or recommendation, if this is your feeling, even if the mutual relationship of trust is existing between you and your reader, still you feel that if I encourage my reader to first read out the entire details that reached to this conclusion or recommendation, that will give better results, then again use the indirect plan. Similarly, if you want to convince your audience, as you can see on the slide, that why your arguments or why your recommendation, it's not the word argument by the way, why your recommendations, why your conclusions are making some sense. And again, you are supposed to begin with the logic. Then if you want your reader to follow your thought process that reached that conclusion or recommendation, then again you are supposed to come up in your analytical report with the logical argument style, first with the arguments, reasoning, and then to conclusion or recommendation. As you can see, dear students, on the slide, yes, there are 3 methods of subdividing the analytical reports by logical arguments. Namely, first method is 2 + 2 = 4 approach. Second is the scientific method, and the third one is the yardstick approach. One by one, we would be discussing each of these approaches, these methods in detail. But before moving on to the individual details of these 3, let me give you some general suggestions about them. Now, whether you will be using 2 + 2 = 4 approach, or you will be using the scientific method, or you would be going for the yardstick method or approach, it depends on what? 1, it depends on the nature of the facts that you are having in your analytical report. Subjective facts, facts in numbers, facts in statistics. What kind of facts are you having? Facts based on arguments or facts based on some mathematical data? What kind of facts are you having? Facts based on geographical location? So what kind of facts are you having with you in your report? The selection of method definitely would depend on it. Similarly, the reasoning, as you can see on the slide, that you are going to pick up for your analytical report, the reasoning process. On the reasoning process as well, the choice of the method would depend a lot. For one reasoning process, 2 + 2 = 4 approach might be suitable. For another reasoning process, scientific method might be good. Yet for another reasoning process, the yardstick approach might be good. So 2 things are supposed to be kept in mind. 1, the nature of the facts you're having, and second, the reasoning process. As you can see on the slides, the reasoning process that you are adopting for your analytical report. On these two things will the choice of methods depend. Then, dear students, you are supposed to keep in mind one thing, that these three approaches are not mutually exclusive actually. Sometimes you might be having all the three lines of thinking, or all the three approaches existing in the same analytical report at the same time. A mixture of three might be required. They might overlap in a report. Similarly, if you are writing a very long report, in that report, for one section you might suggest to have 2 + 2 = 4 approach. In another section of the same report, you might be going for the scientific method, yet in another section of the same report, you might recommend yourself to use the yardstick approach. So, as you can see on the slide, you are having the relaxation to use the three methods at the same time, as well as in different portions of the same report, analytical report. Yes. Now, beginning with 2 + 2 = 4 approach in detail. As dear students, you can see on the slides, let me explain it to you. Reports developed around a list of reasons that collectively add up to the main point you are trying to prove. List of reasons. For example, you are having many reasons. Now, all those reasons actually are those reasons which collectively will form the framework for developing or moving to your conclusion. So, these 2 + 2 = 4 approach basically is an approach in which you are basing or dividing your analytical report on the basis of those logics, on the basis of those reasons which sum up together to reach to that conclusion. Yes, as you can see on the slide, the main reasons behind your conclusions and recommendations make the main points in your outline of the report. For any conclusion, for any शाहरुख आपकी हल्की सी भी जो आवाज़ होती है रिकॉर्डिंग डिस्टर्ब करती है. For any conclusion, for any recommendation, there are some reasons. I repeat again, for any conclusion, for any recommendation, always there are some reasons that collectively move together towards that conclusion. Now, when you divided if you remember the analytical report on the basis of recommendations and conclusions, the conclusions and the recommendations were making the dividing framework. Over here in 2 + 2 = 4 approach, these are not the conclusions and the recommendations that are making the framework for dividing an analytical report. Rather, these are the reasons behind those conclusions and recommendations that will be making the dividing framework of an analytical report. There are two things, remember one thing: conclusions, recommendations, and here the reasons behind those conclusions and recommendations. These are reasons, recommendations. These are the reasons behind those recommendations and conclusions. Now, when you divided an analytical report on the basis of conclusions and recommendations, the conclusions and the recommendations directly formed the framework for dividing the analytical report. But when you are using 2 + 2 = 4 approach, the reasons behind these conclusions and recommendations will be forming the dividing framework of an analytical report. Yes, as you can see on the slides, dear students, then each reason that you are giving in your analytical report in 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach, then that reason should be supported by evidence, the evidence that you collected through analysis. Then, dear students, 2 plus 2, as you can see on the slides, 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach is the most efficient approach when you are writing an analytical report for the most skeptic reader audience, who would not believe you unless and until you convince that reader for whatever you are saying is having yes a reason for it. Okay, dear students, now moving on to the example of 2 plus 2 equal to of an analytical report using the 2 plus 2 equal to 4 method for its division. Let us see, have a look on the slide. The writer of the report is Gray Johansson, executive assistant to the president of a diversified company, as you can see on the slide, and the purpose given to him was he was supposed to do one thing, as you can see on the slide, to prepare a memo. And why to prepare a memo? To analyze the performance of the restaurant division, to recommend what to do out of the 4 options. Number 1, continue the current course, sell off the chain, remodel the existing facilities, and build new restaurants. So Mr. Johansson was given a job to have a look into the restaurant business that is already running, that should they be expanding this business, should they be selling it off, or should they be building new restaurants or remodel the existing facilities. Now, to analyze the entire situation, Mr. Johansson is going to write an analytical report, and the method that he will be adopting in order to write this analytical report would be 2 plus 2 equal to 4. Now, as you can see on the slide, dear students, let us see what Mr. Johansson has to say about this report first. Quote, Johansson says, quote, I knew that whatever I recommend would alienate somebody. My difficulties were compounded by the nature of the problem. I could have made a good case for any of the 3 options, but as an objective, neutral, and unbiased observer, I gradually came to the conclusion of my own, that we should sell some of the restaurants and use the proceeds to offset the cost of remodeling the remaining locations and the cost of adding new outlets. I decided that my strategy would be to build a case for this course of action by gradually presenting the various reasons that had emerged from my analysis of the options. If you simply ponder upon the last 2 lines, he says that I would build a case for this course of action by gradually presenting the various reasons that had emerged from my analysis of the option. And what kind of approach is this, by the way? This is the underlying principle for 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach, where the reasons behind the conclusion and the recommendations, they form the network, dividing framework of an analytical report. Dear students, as you can see on the slide, it's the outline for the analytical report by Mr. Johansson, and in this outline you can see that it is beginning with introduction. In the very beginning, it's not the part of the outline, the main idea is floated, just to make you understand. It's not the part of the outline. Main idea says we should remodel selected restaurants and add some new locations using funds generated by selling several existing sites. Now, this is not the part of the outline. This is simply the conclusion and the recommendation to which all the reasoning will lead. Now let us see which point the outline is beginning from. As you can see on the slide, point number 1 is introduction. Then point number 2 is reason. As you can see, I am pointing it. Although growth has slowed, the restaurant division shows underlying strength. A. Sales/profits have slipped, but the division is still a major source of corporation's business. B. Slowdown, this is the outline. Slowdown is due partially to a low rate of restaurant startups. C. Older facilities have lost business, but newer locations have not. D. Patrons still like our formula. Then this is the next part. Look, first it is introduction, as you can see on the slide. Then number 2 is reason, the first reason. Then number 3 is again another reason, and the reason is the restaurant industry is entering a new phase which can work to our advantage. A. Shakeout is likely. Survivors will enjoy higher sales and profits. B. We are well positioned to survive the shakeout. Now these are 2 reasons in the outline, and an analytical report based on 2 + 2 = 4 approach is having the divided framework on the basis of reasons. So in the outline you can see that these are the reasons after the introduction that are being given. After this, number 4, at number 4 you can see here recommendation. Upgrade the chain by remodeling and adding restaurants in the southeast. Sell off older facilities to raise cash for reinvestment in better locations. And 5th point, Roman numeral 5th, is the summary in the outline. Now this is an outline for an analytical report based on 2 + 2 = 4 approach, and the basic underlying dividing framework was the reasons, as you could see on the slides. The reasons was forming the dividing framework of an analytical report based on 2 + 2 = 4 method. Dear students, this is the first page of the report by Mr. Johansson. Kindly have a look. I'm scrolling it down and up. The first page, the first page of the report. Analytical report by Mr. Johansson, in which he is trying to analyze the restaurant business. This is the second page here. Then, dear students, let us move to the third page. This is the third page, dear students. Let me scroll it up and down for you. Here, this is the third page. Let us start from the first page of this report. Dear students, remember one thing: in 2 + 2 = 4 approach, the writer of the report never reveals his standpoint in the beginning, never reveals his mindset and position from the beginning. He simply starts with the problem, the scope, the background, the methodology, the analysis scheme, and then giving the reasons, moves gradually to the conclusions. Let us see whether Mr. Johansson, if he says that this is a report based on 2 + 2 = 4 approach, following this scheme or not in his report. Okay, dear students, have a look on the screen kindly. It's written in a memo format. Date March 27, 1995. Then 2, Elton Sanders, President. From Gary Johansson, Executive Assistant to the President. Subject: possibilities for the restaurant division. Now, dear students, here comes the first heading, introduction. Let us see what Mr. Johansson says in his introduction portion. The report was authorized by President Elton Sanders on January 11, 1995. Now this line is simply showing that who asked Mr. Johansson to write this report. Its purpose is to analyze the performance of a restaurant division and to recommend a course of action. The purpose is being described. Still, he has not launched any recommendation. The analysis does not include institutional food service operations. This is the scope, the limitation, that this area will not be touched in the report. Then, dear students, after that he writes, the first Gateway restaurant was opened over 25 years ago in Falls Church, Virginia. Initially, the chain consisted of moderately priced cafeteria-style restaurants located in suburbs of Washington, D.C. Encouraged by the success of these operations, Gateway management gradually expanded the chain into surrounding states, moving first into the Middle Atlantic and New England areas, then into Southeast. As the chain grew, the cafeteria format was modified. Although some sites still feature a self-serve buffet, most of the restaurants now provide table service and a complete breakfast, lunch and dinner menu. Now this is the background. Dear students, Mr. Johansson first told us in the first 2 paragraphs who authorized him to write this report, then the purpose of this report, then some limitation and scope, and after that he is giving in the next paragraph the background of the entire restaurant business, not revealing his position, not revealing his stance. What is his recommendation? We do not find any hint over here in these first 2 paragraphs. Next, dear students, he says, historically, the restaurant division has been one of Gateway's strongest operations, providing approximately 20% of the corporation's sale and 26% of its profits for much of the past decade. However, in the past 2 years, the restaurant division's sales and profits have fallen below expectations. Here he is launching the problem. However, in the past 2 years, the restaurant division's sales and profits have fallen below expectations. In this line, Mr. Johansson is telling you about the problem that the restaurant business is facing for the last 2 years. In an attempt to determine why, management has decided to take a closer look at the division's recent performance in the light of the trends in the restaurant industry as a whole. These issues are examined in the following sections. A final section analyzes the alternatives available to management and presents recommendations for the future. He is again now not giving you any hint what is his recommendation. Simply he is telling you what this report is going to do. Analyze the entire situation and will come up with recommendations. No recommendations are floated in the beginning. 2 + 2 = 4 approach in the analytical reports. Then this paragraph he says, as you can see on the screen, in presenting this report, the study team analyzed internal data and reviewed published information pertaining to the restaurant industry. The team also analyzed demographic data furnished by the business development agencies of the 21 states in which gateway restaurants are located. In addition, the team has interviewed over 50 restaurant owners and managers, politicians, civic leaders, and real estate professionals, and has surveyed some 1,500 gateway restaurant patrons. In this paragraph, he is simply telling you about his methodology of research. He's not telling you anything about the recommendation again. What methodology he adopted to write this report. Interviews, then looking into some records of 21 states, etc. So this was the introduction by, as you can see, dear students, I'm scrolling it down again, by Mr. Gary Johansson. As you can see, that introduction portion, there is no hint of recommendation of any sort, conclusion or recommendation. 2 plus 2 4 equal 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach does not recommend you to float the conclusions or recommendation in the beginning. So Mr. Johansson, since is following 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach, is not giving you the recommendations and conclusions in the beginning. The entire introduction is based on the person is simply mentioning the problem, the purpose, the scope, the limitations, and methodology, and history, background. Then, dear students, we move on to the next heading. As you can see on the screen, recent performance of the restaurant division. Let us see what he has to say about it. By historical standards, the restaurant division shows signs of slowing down. Instead of growing at the customary rate of 8 to 10% each year, the division's sales and profits have edged up by only 3% for the past 2 years. Despite this leveling off, restaurant operations still account for approximately 25% of the corporation's business. Restaurant division sales in the most recent fiscal years totaled $44 million and profits were $3.9 million. A closer look at the division's financial results suggests the two internal factors are involved in the restaurant division's relatively slow growth. Here he is coming up with the reasons. Have a look. A closer look at the division's financial results suggests that two internal factors are involved in the restaurant division's relatively slow growth. Now here he is coming up with reasons, and as I told you, when you are writing an analytical report on the basis of logical division, then the reasons behind especially you are talking about 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach, the reasons behind the recommendations will be forming the framework, and here he is coming up with the reasons. 1. In the years past, the growth in sales and profits was fueled by the addition of new restaurants to the chain. However, in the past 2 years, only 3 new restaurants have been opened. This record is less than half the average annual rate of opening throughout the 1970s and most of the 1980s. First reason he has given is that in the past the rate of opening up new outlets was 8 to 10%, whereas in the last 2 years it reduced to only 2%, I suppose. Reduced by half. Only 2 new chains were added in the last 2 years, and Mr. Johansson says that in the past, as compared to the percentage of the past and the present, it is half the percentage of the past years, when I think they used to open up, if doubling it, 6 to 7 restaurants per 2 years. Next he says, as you can see on the screen, performance has been uneven. Sales have declined in the Middle Atlantic and New England states where facilities are aging, but sales have increased in the Southeast, where most of the new restaurants are located. Now here he is giving another reason, and that reason is based on performance. He says the performance of the restaurants, especially over here in the Middle Atlantic and New England, is not good. Facilities are aging, means the same older facilities are there, but sales have increased and new outlets are there with new facilities, but we are existing again with the same facilities. So the performance level is low. Another reason being given. Let us move to the next part of the report, dear students. This was first page of the analytical report by Mr. Johansson, based on 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach. And 2 plus 2 equal to 4 approach is basically one type of dividing the analytical report on the basis of logic, not on the basis of conclusions and recommendations. Let us see what next he has to say. Here, kindly have a look. It's page number 2 of the report by Mr. Johansson. He says, these facts suggest that the leveling off in the restaurants division's growth is at least partially attributable to a lack of investment in the chain's facilities rather than to a fundamental weakness in the chain itself. Okay, in fact, a survey of Gateway's patrons underscores the restaurant's continued popularity. Offering moderate prices in a pleasant, family-oriented environment still has broad appeal. Now he is again not giving you any recommendation. He is simply telling you what is happening. He has simply not in front of you opened up his stance on his recommendations. Next heading, as you can see, trends in the restaurant industry. Let us see what Mr. Johansson has to say. Although Gateway's restaurant division appears to be fundamentally sound, the flattening of its growth curve reflects a slowdown in the restaurant industry as a whole. The rate of the sales growth for full-service restaurants has fallen from 5% in the early 1980s to roughly 1.5% today. Many analysts contend that this slowing growth reflects a subtle shift in consumer behavior in the 1970s and 1980s as more women joined the workforce. Eating out became increasingly common, and restaurants sprang up to satisfy demand. In the past few years, however, the number of meals eaten in restaurants seems to have reached he says, in the past few years, however, the number of meals eaten in the restaurants seems to have reached a plateau. Many people would rather pop a gourmet frozen dinner into the microwave and watch a movie on the VCR than pay restaurant prices. Whatever the reasons, the leveling out of demand has left too many restaurants vying for too few patrons, a situation that spells trouble for many participants in the industry. Typically, when an industry has excess capacity, a shakeout period occurs. Weaker companies fail and only the strong survive. Once the shakeout ends, the survivors generally enjoy a period of higher sales and profits. Talking about the problem in some outlets where the sales are lowering down. Facilities are there in excess, with people to buy food, sit over there, come and visit the place, the number is a bit too low. Survival of the fittest situation is occurring at some places. Since he's talking about the number of the chains, a chain of the restaurants by the company in different places, some places are having some problems, the other places are having some different sort of problems, and this particularly this chain of restaurants he is referring to is having the problem of low sales. If the restaurant industry follows the usual pattern, the small independent restaurants will be most likely to fail. Larger chains can be expected to weather the shakeout because of their superior financial strength. Ultimately, the survivors will be the restaurants with the best locations and the most appealing combinations of food, price, atmosphere and service. Again, he is not giving any recommendations, but he is telling that which restaurants with which combinations will be surviving. Not particularly giving you any recommendations for your restaurant chain. Simply telling what will happen, where and how. Generally. If a shakeout does occur, a restaurant division should be in a strong position, particularly in Southeast. The division's facilities in this region are relatively new and they are located in rapidly growing affluent suburbs. Furthermore, gateway patrons in the Southeast are particularly loyal, typically dining at a gateway restaurant at least twice a month. Again, he is not giving any recommendations, but simply generally communicating the situation, that this is the situation where this person will survive, this thing will survive, this thing will not survive, and this combination will work. Generally. Then, dear students, next, here he comes with the portion analysis of alternatives. This is the fourth section of the report. And in this fourth section, the reasons portion is complete now. He will be coming up with recommendations after communicating to you all the reasons that are there in his mind and that are supported by evidence, factual evidence. Here he says management is considering three alternatives for the restaurant division. One, continue to operate the existing restaurants but minimize the capital reinvested in the business. Sell off the chain. Upgrade the chain by remodeling older facilities and adding new sites. The first alternative is certainly viable. Although sales and profits have leveled off, the restaurant division is still a major source of earnings. One could argue that by maintaining the status quo, Gateway can generate approximately $4 million per year in cash to reinvest in other businesses with a higher growth potential. On the other hand, without additional investment, the restaurant division is likely to experience a further erosion as its aging facilities become less and less appealing to patrons. Mr. Johansson was already given three options. Now, after reasoning in the beginning of the report, he is coming up with each of the options and telling you the pros and cons of each. He says that fine, continuing with the same existing restaurants is fine. It's a viable option, but there are some drawbacks that slowly and gradually the aging facilities will become less and less appealing to the patrons. Next he says, Steve Whitelaw, Trends in the Restaurant Industry, speech delivered at 1987 Western Restaurant Convention, and these are the references given, not for you at the moment. Let us now move, dear students, to the third page of the report, and this is the remaining portion of the analysis of the alternatives. Here he says that the alternative of selling off the division is somewhat more appealing from a financial standpoint. Instead of gradually pulling cash out of the restaurant operation until the business deteriorates, Gateway could sell its holdings immediately while the business is still performing well. The restaurant operation has a market value of approximately $40 million, a sum that would go a long way towards funding management's diversification program. But selling the operation would mean a loss of about a quarter of our sales and profits. Unless management can immediately acquire a business of similar size, this loss would have a severe impact. Now he was having the second option given by the management, okay, we can sell this business off totally. He says fine, at the moment this business is profitable, if we sell it off it will be giving us good amount of money, but still it will be having a very negative impact if we are not having an equally strong business existing with us already. So he nullifies the second option as well. The third alternative, next he says, as you can see on the screen, the third alternative is to expand and upgrade the restaurant operation in an effort to restore its historical growth pattern. According to division management, such a program would acquire an investment of approximately $22 million over the next 3 years for remodeling 20 of the older restaurants and adding 9 new sites. This expansion could result in a 10% annual growth in sales and 12% annual growth in profits over the next 5 years. The key stumbling block to this alternative is the required allocation of $22 million in investment capital. In the company's most recent strategic plan, management committed itself to a program of diversification into new, higher growth businesses. The lion's share of the firm's investment funds is being channelized in 2 new areas, leaving very little for shoring up existing operations. Now he is again nullifying the third option as well. That the third option was to expand and upgrade the restaurant division given by the authorities to Mr. Johansson. But for that he says that a sum of $22 million is required, which the company at the moment is not having. So it's not practically possible. Then he comes up with his final recommendation. As you can see on the screen, one possible solution would be to sell off several of the restaurant division's existing sites, then use the money to refurnish other locations and add new restaurants to the chain. Discussions with real estate professionals suggest that a number of Gateway's older restaurants are located on land that has appreciated greatly in value. Many of these sites were purchased in early 1970s when land values were considerably lower than they are today. These same sites tend to be Gateway's oldest, least attractive restaurants, where sales have slipped most dramatically. By selling off 7 of the chain's 80 restaurants, Gateway could raise approximately $12.6 million, which is over half the amount required to fund the remodeling and expansion program. The remaining $9.5 million could be obtained by reinvesting the division's annual earnings for 3 years. Although selling the 7 sites would initially reduce the division's sales and earnings over a 5-year period, the loss would be more than offset by gains from new and remodeled locations. Now, dear students, he has come up finally with his final recommendation. A mixture of the 3 alternatives is suggested by Mr. Johansson, that some of the outlets should be sold out and the money that should be sold out, and the money that the chain would be getting out of, the company would be getting out of that sale, that money then can be used to remodel the older chains of the restaurants and upgrade them, and after that the restaurant business can get a bit stabilized and move to the past glory. Then, dear students, last is the summary. He says the restaurant division appears to be fundamentally sound. The fallout in its sales and earnings growth is due largely to a reduction in the cash being reinvested in the business. I repeat, the restaurant division appears to be fundamentally sound. The fallout in its sales and earnings growth is due largely to a reduction in the cash being reinvested in the business. Although the restaurant industry as a whole is maturing, strong chains like Gateway can expect to achieve continued growth in sales and profits as weaker operations fall by the wayside. By selling some of its older, less appealing sites and using the cash to refurbish and expand the chain, the restaurant division can resume its historic growth pattern and continue to play a major role in the corporation. Here, dear students, this is the end of an analytical report that was divided on the basis of 2 + 2 = 4 approach. The person Johansson did not begin with the recommendations and the conclusions in the beginning, and he started slowly and gradually by giving you the problem, the background. Let me show you again. Here, kindly have a look on the screen. Mr. Johansson started with the introduction. In this introduction, he simply talked about the background of the problem. Then he talked about the problem that was faced, and then he talked about the reason why this report is required. After that, the history. After that, he simply shared with you what kind of methodology is he going to adopt, has he adopted for writing this report. Then he moved on to the next, recent performance of the restaurant division. Here he came up with the first reason in detail that he thinks is the reason of decline of the restaurant business. Then, dear students, in the next page, here Mr. Johansson is, as you can see, let me scroll it down and up for you. Here, this is page number 2 of the report. He is coming up with reason number 2, trends in the restaurant industry. He is talking about the other problems, the reasons. Then the fourth portion is the analysis of the alternatives. Here he analyzes all the alternatives available and gives you some recommendations. And finally, to the third page of the report, we see in detail he is giving you the alternatives. Then he is moving to the summary. So, dear students, this was an example of an analytical report that was written on the basis of 2 + 2 = 4 approach. We started our lecture by discussing the analytical reports that can be divided on the basis of 3 methods. So one was 2 + 2 = 4 approach, second was the scientific method, and the third was the yardstick approach. And today we could complete on the first one, that is 2 + 2 = 4 approach. I hope that whenever you will be requiring this approach to write your analytical report, you will very successfully do that. Wishing you a best of luck in everything. Thank you in every good thing, by the way. Thank you so very much. Allah Hafiz.